Thank you for tuning in to No Sudden Moves Radio. And remember, stay on the proven path so you don't risk falling behind. Here at Business Legends, we don't overthink it. Look around and see what everyone else is doing. If it's working for them, it will work for you.
Welcome to Wait It Out, where we believe there's no reason to act now. The opportunity will still be there when the timing is better.
The age of disruption isn't coming, it's here. And the boldest move isn't following the crowd, it's following your why. I'm Patrick Ledden, and you're listening to Disruption Lab. Hey folks, welcome to the Disruption Lab podcast. My name is Patrick Ledden, and each week I have the opportunity to sit down and talk to someone about the disruptions they've faced in their lives, or the disruptions they watch other people face, or maybe a little bit of a combination of both, what they've learned along the way, hopefully to help you on your journey. I mean, let's face it, life is full of twists and turns, and you might have a big goal in life that you want to chase, but then stuff's going to kind of get in the way. So how do you overcome obstacles? How do you fight your way through? How do you persevere? How do you surround yourself with great folks along the way? And I'm surrounded by a great person today. This is Charlie, the Spaniard Brenneman. We met a few years back. He was on the Leadership Lab podcast that I did, and we've had a good conversation several times since then. It's been great to have you on my network, Charlie, and I'm just so glad to meet you. And plus, I get to call somebody the Spaniard, which is always fun. So welcome to the Disruption Lab, my friend.
I appreciate being here. And as you and I were talking briefly beforehand, but as you were doing the introduction there, all of the things you're saying are I mean, I could take that quote and apply it to my speaking events and everything I do. So we're very much on the same page.
Well, let's do that. Let's talk a little bit about your speaking gigs, and let's talk about, like, pick one of these topics, maybe the one around the people you surround yourself with. So Jim Patterson and I have 4 fundamental rules, or facts. We call them 4 fundamental facts when it comes to disruption. And number 3 is that relationships provide you both headwinds and tailwinds. You know, when your parents or whoever raised you said, be careful who you hang around with, it continues throughout your entire life. Is that fair?
Yeah. And I'll a little bit in a different direction, but I'll circle back to it. The whole parents thing. I have a 5th grader and a 2nd grader daughter, and then a son. And my mom would always, we kind of bust on her, we bust her chops. There's four kids in my family, but she would always say, oh, you'll understand when you have kids of your own, which is probably what a lot of parents say. And then I always get reminded, hey, Charlie, you can call me too. Hey, Charlie, you can call me too. And then, well, your brother calls me every day. Your sister calls me, and I always get slack for not calling enough. And then more than once in a while, my kids will leave me feeling dejected, rejected, like they don't care about me, et cetera, et cetera. And it makes me reflect on how I approach my parents. And so I'm learning from that to reach out to my parents more. Now, kind of directly to what you were saying, the headwinds and tailwinds and relationships, you really just never know when people, and it was probably going back to my parents, something I learned very young. You just never know. You never know life, period. So leading with kindness, leading with generosity, leading with helpfulness, those things are beneficial. Almost sounds transactional, but those things are favorable to a happy and fulfilling life, because you just never know when people are going to come around. Someone's going to randomly get asked something about you. Maybe that could lead to a positive thing in your life here or there, and you just never know. So it's been a principle of mine like that since the beginning. And then regarding fighting, when I left teaching to start fighting, I wanted to be one of the best fighters in the world. And at that time, I adapted this idea.
Yeah, man, I jumped right in. I didn't even talk about fighting. Yeah.
I figured,
because I said the Spaniard. People probably like, why is the guy called the Spaniard? Yeah.
No, well, I figured as I said that, we'll circle back to it. But I'll finish that thought and then segue into that explanation. But when I started fighting, I wanted to be one of the best in the world. So I adopted this mantra of surround yourself with the best. And it was like, that guy's the best. How do I spar? How do I wrestle? How do I grapple with that guy? How do I talk to him? How do I ask him questions? And I carry that to this day through the books I read and the conversations I have. But yes, my story, I guess, in a nutshell, and then you can unpack it however you'd like. But I was a small town wrestler from Pennsylvania. academics and athletics went hand in hand. Grew up. It was always an up and down thing though. I was good, but I don't want to say I always lost, but I was good, but I lost big matches. Formed a lot of character. And then I wrestled in college, this up and down, and then became a Spanish teacher. And then after 3 years of Spanish teaching, I disrupted my life and pursued a completely different path of trying to reach the UFC. And then I had a up and down career in the UFC, and now I use that story from start to finish, and as a speaker and author and former podcaster myself.
So I got to figure that out. Like, let's unpack that a moment. So you're teaching school, you're a few years in, right? So by the time you're a few years in, you like know where the parking spots are in the parking lot, you know how the how to get to the teacher's lounge, you know, you've been through a few semesters, you know how things kind of work. You're kind of getting comfortable, I would imagine, after a few years of teaching, and it's probably a pretty decent job. So, I mean, where did the yearning come from to say, I
Yeah.
really want to get back in the ring or the octagon and do
Yeah.
this thing?
Yeah. I think the older I get, the more I realize how a unique perspective that I approach life with. I grew up thinking I probably was just a very like conservative, regular, follow the path type guy. But shortly into my teaching career, probably about a year and a half, I taught for 3 years, but probably a year and a half into it, I started to get restless because my entire life I had lived this really dedicated, disciplined, sacrificial wrestling life where if anyone wrestles, you know how hard it is. It's literally the hardest thing I've ever done. And then I was just regular and I thought, this is awesome. I'm regular. I can eat whatever I want, drink whatever I want, whatever. Don't have to work out. And then I actually started to miss it. And there was nowhere else for me to go other than professional fighting because I wasn't good enough of a wrestler to pursue international wrestling. And then I'm not a fighter, so it didn't even occur to me. However, a couple kids I wrestled with started fighting, started to have success. And I thought, wow, maybe that's a skill set I can acquire. I didn't think of fighting because fighting is very scary. Like anything, a lot of stuff we do is very scary, but I didn't look at it. I simply looked at it as that's a skill set I could acquire and I could probably be pretty successful at it. And so that changed the trajectory of my life. I left teaching, got my master's. From my master's, after grad school, dove in full time to fighting and, had that career.
How about going from a wrestling, NCAA level wrestling, then into a striking sport, right? So you're going from wrestling, or even I believe you do Brazilian jiu-jitsu. That's not striking either, I believe.
Correct. That's
Right. So
grappling.
all of a
Yeah.
sudden going into a striking sport where it's like somebody's going to kick me in the head or they're going to punch me
Yeah.
in the gut. I mean, there's an expression that people have. I'm sure you've heard it many times. Everybody's got a plan, right? Until they get punched in the
Yeah.
face. So, I mean, how'd you work your way
Yeah.
through that one mentally?
Yeah. So that's a thing in fighting itself. This is how I see it with a wrestler who becomes a fighter. There are those of us who predominantly rely on our wrestling and never learn anything else. There's those of us, which I am, and which made me successful, is I became like good enough, proficient enough at stand-up striking to lead into my wrestling takedowns and jiu-jitsu. So I'm a brown belt jiu-jitsu, black belt's the highest. So I learned that skill set. I learned striking as it helped kind of segue into my wrestling. And then I would wrestling jiu-jitsu on the ground. And then there's some wrestlers who just become really freaking good strikers, like Justin Gagey is one, and Frankie Edgar's another that come to mind. So it was hard for me. Everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. True. And then my plan when I got punched in the face was to wrestle, but it was not to just blindly wrestle. It was, oh crap, let's set up our wrestling, go. So I was never a tremendous striker, but I didn't really, it wasn't my thing.
Well, it sounds like you're, playing to your strength, right? So the idea
Correct.
of saying, okay, this discipline, and this happens, you don't have to wrestle or you don't have to strike someone or fight. I mean, physically, and that type of thing, but mentally or emotionally or whatever you're doing, you like think about like, what's my strength I can play to, and how do I get myself in that position to apply
Correct.
what I'm really good at?
Yeah. And also, you can apply this to life, business, academics, whatever. There was pressure, and I succumbed to that pressure at times to be a more exciting fighter. Everyone kind of, wrestling's boring. Wrestler fighters are boring. You're a wet blanket. And I listened to it. and it got me all self-conscious to a point where I tried to become a stand-up fighter, and I got knocked out cold. The only time I ever got knocked out cold was the fight where I thought, I'm a fighter, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to box and I'm going to, and it just wasn't my best tool. And I kind of, lack of a better word, was peer pressured or allowed peer pressure to get to me, or fan pressure, I guess. And then after that, I'm like, you know what, screw that. This is me. This is my thing. I am what I am. And then I last several fights in my career kind of leaned into that, albeit didn't go well. I still lost. But I learned that valuable lesson.
Yeah, but you had a pretty good record, didn't you?
Yeah, I was 19-8 overall. When you're fighting in the UFC, it's like playing in any professional sport. Even if you're like terrible, you're still one of the best in the world. And when you're average, you're still, you're that good. There's just a high level, and the millimeter difference makes a win or a loss, and that's the fight game.
You oftentimes hear that when people are talking about certain sports. I hear it like they'll talk about college athletes, like college football players, for example. They'll say, oh, when they go pro, the speed is just completely different at that level of the game. And I'm sure it's the same thing in every sport. I mean, what did you learn about even your own ability to kind of go, okay, I'm going to ratchet it up another level, like from middle school wrestling to high school to college? I mean, what did you learn about yourself in the process?
Yeah, I think most of that answer lies in college wrestling as opposed to fighting. College wrestling at a Division I level, and then there's international levels beyond that. And in college wrestling at the Division I level, my highest finish was the round of 12. So you win one more match and you become an All-American. I was a match away from All-American. So again, it was pretty good, but there's levels beyond where I was. I think the wrestling really, really taught me to what discipline is, what sacrifice is, what choice and consequences. Taught me the truth that even if you do everything right, you still could lose, and that's that. And there's no second chance. You just boom. Like, the difference between wrestling and fighting, and you can apply this to different areas of life, is when you lose in wrestling, it's over forever. Once you're 4 years of college and you're not a national champion, you can never become a national champion again, ever. With fighting, I mean, you see guys' careers up and down, up and down. You talk enough smack, you get back in the spotlight, you win a fight or two, boom, you're fighting for the title. It is not that way in college wrestling. You lose, your dreams are done forever. And that is such a hard pill to swallow. So then when I got to fighting, I had that background and that ability as a Division I wrestler. And then I just clung on to a lot of former Division I wrestlers who were successful fighters. And then I learned the fight game from those guys.
As you were saying, wrestling and fighting, I wrote them down, and I'm gonna kind of deviate from the way we've been saying it, but see if this kind of makes sense. So there's a lot of people, myself at times too, where you're kind of wrestling with something, and it oftentimes is, between the ears. And then, and maybe, it's between the ears, you're kind of wrestling with, like, should I do this? Should I do that? Maybe it shows up in even butterflies in the stomach at time or whatever. But then there's almost this switch moment where you say, okay, I'm going to do this thing. And you go from kind of wrestling with this thing to truly being a fighter, as far as fighting and advocating for yourself or trying to make this thing happen. And I know you do a lot of work with, you and I were chatting ahead of time. I knew you did a lot of work with youth and corporate. You're also doing some work in prisons. I just love to kind of hear like what you're helping people kind of wrestle with and helping turn them into fighters using that analogy.
Yeah. And that analogy is spot on. It's essentially my livelihood, wrestling, fighting, applying those things to life. I think that and this has been hard for me to figure out, because, in what you do, an element of what you do, it's business, marketing, selling books, writing books is one thing, selling books is another thing, producing a podcast, having people listen to your podcast. I was taught early on there's, speaking and then the business of speaking. They're different things. And so when I think of the question you ask, like, what is it that I talk about? There's 1,000 different things I could say, but I think the deepest part is kind of what you alluded to in the introduction. It's fear, it's doubt, it's insecurity, it's the belief that you cannot, and then providing my story as proof that you can. And I'm fortunate enough that I had a successful enough fighting career to make that point, to prove that point to people, that you don't have to be Conor McGregor. You don't have to be Tom Brady. Like, there's 10 million other examples of success that you can be like me, you can be like you can be like not Joe Rogan, right? And still be successful. And I want to give that hope and belief, instill it in people, because man, it really wrecked some peace in my life growing up, because I just always would doubt and always point and blame and this and that. And now it's like, you know what, man, just do it. Just do it, you know?
How'd you figure out that lesson?
Time. It's kind of one of those hard earned truths. Your parents tell you something. I've had people tell me in business, you know, like, hey Charlie, you should do this. And I'm like, I hear what you're saying. I don't feel it enough to do it. And then 2 years later, I'll say, hey Andy, you were right, man. Like, you were right. I knew you were right then, but I couldn't just do it. I had to live it and I had to learn it. So I think it was that. It was, specifically speaking about fighting, it's getting knocked out cold on TV, having hundreds, thousands of people tell you how crappy and terrible you are, that you suck, that your wife should leave you, that you're the most boring fighter ever in the UFC. It's reading all of the messages. It's getting up the next day. It's crying. It's stuffing my face full of crappy food. And then it's going back to practice on Monday and then building up belief again. And it's that yo-yo, 5-7 years of it, that at the end of it, you're like, holy smokes, like I can do a lot of stuff. And then that's it. Like, I can't fast track it. I just have to have my mom, my dad, my friends, my teammates tell me, hey man, the answer is in keeping going. That's it. Keep going. And then after a long time, you start to turn a little bit.
Yeah, one of the guys we interviewed, Patterson and I, when we were writing our book, we interviewed a guy named Marlon Wayans, and he's a really well-known actor. He was on In Living Color with his brothers, and then he
Yeah.
did a TV show with his other brother called the Wayans Brothers. And he just talked to us about the idea that for his situation, the disruptive thing he had happen to him was just a conversation with his brother, saying, his brother named Keenan Ivory Way, and saying, hey, if you want to have the phone to ring, you need to figure out how to produce and direct and do all these other things as well. And we use that as kind of an introductory story to really get people to understand, like, you're not Marlon Wayans, you're also not Charlie Brenneman, you're also not Patrick Glenn, you're whoever you are, but you're wired to disrupt as well. And we talk about few different ways, but one of the ways that ties back to what you were just saying there is you're wired through your own experiences. You, if you ever sit down and say to yourself, I don't know how I'm going to get through this situation, if you just take a few moments to write down the other situations you've gotten through,
Mm-hmm.
you start to realize, oh, I can do this. Now, some people may be able to not have to get knocked out cold on TV, Charlie, to figure this out. But
Yeah.
not everybody's
Yeah.
a Spaniard, right? But we have to figure this thing out to realize, gosh, we have gotten through these other things. We can do it again.
Yeah. And there's a moment that I cite this often in my assemblies and presentations, but I was teaching Spanish. I was growing restless. And every day after teaching, I would go home, and there was an organization no longer exists called Pride Fighting Championships. And they would have like reruns at probably 3:30, in the afternoon, weekdays. And I would go home and I would probably still be wearing my teaching outfit. I would sit on the edge of my single bed. I was still living with my parents at that time, one of those like 13, 16-inch box TVs. And I would watch this fighting and I'm like, man, this is crazy. This is crazy. And then as I wanted to disconnect myself from teaching and I continued to grow an interest in that, I was having a conversation with my best friend at the time. And I said, after a few months, and I said, hey, man, I'm going to leave teaching to pursue the UFC. And this is a moment or a sentence that he said to me that changed a lot. He said, I have no doubt you will, because you do everything you say you're going to do. And I never thought of myself that way. I always thought of myself as the second place finisher, the kid from Central PA who's not rich. It's like, woe is me, woe is me, woe is me. Every excuse in the book. And then he said that, and I was like, whoa, you think of me that way? If you think of me that way, other people think of me that way. And if you are all thinking of me that way, I can think of me that way. So that really changed. I mean, today, it's not like I got rid of all that doubt and insecurity. My wife tells me all the time, Charlie, you're the most insecure person I know. But I don't let it affect me or hold me back. So it's not, I don't know if it's turning down the volume. I don't know if it's ignoring it. I don't know if it's just like being apathetic to it. But I mean, I'm as insecure as they come, but I just don't let it affect me anymore because of those experiences that we talked about.
There's something, as you were talking about that, I was like, I can relate to this idea because I would say, for example, Oh yeah, I was in the Army. I was in an airborne unit. I was a Ranger in the Army, but I wasn't in this unit. I didn't do this
Yeah,
thing,
right.
or I taught at Vanderbilt, but I wasn't this professor writing about this thing or that. There's always that constant, can always be for me a constant like, oh, I'm not in the first place slot. I'm in like the solid second place
Yeah,
slot. And maybe there's a bit of you stack up enough seconds, all of a sudden you are kind of something, of
yeah,
this amalgamation of all these second place finishes. But there's also this like this it creates a drive sometimes in you, but it also can really be your undoing if you don't watch it. So it's like the same thing that I would imagine that makes you have strong perseverance and push through and figure the way out is also the same thing that gnaws at you sometimes.
yeah. And you can talk yourself down and out of anything. For example, I at one point was ranked number 7 in the world, right? But I'm going to tell myself, you got lucky, Charlie. Okay. How did you get lucky? Well, you were supposed to fight a guy who was unranked. The main event guy tested positive for high testosterone. He couldn't fight. Your guy got sick. So they put you against the main event guy, and then you beat the main event guy, and then you were 7, but then you got your butt kicked by a bunch of good guys, and then you fell out of the rankings. Okay. Okay. Like you're right. And if you look at I don't know, a famous actor, if you look at Tom Brady, if you look at anyone, they could all play that stupid story of how they got lucky. And if you want to play that game, play that game. If you want to play the game with me, play the game with me. But the difference between me then and me now is exactly, it's okay. Okay, you're right. I got knocked out. I got choked out. I got bop, bop, bop. You're right. So what's your point? Because I'm over here doing this thing. And if you want to say that stuff, I go for it, but I'm not focusing on it.
It's funny you say that because you were going through that. I was thinking about I have a friend who's a songwriter. He's a pretty successful songwriter. He's had several like top 10 hits in his genre over the
Mm-hmm.
years. And he says every one of those top hits is a miracle.
Right.
It's a series of miracles, right? What you don't see is the fact that he gets up every day and goes in the studio and writes music and gets paired up with people he's never met before because he's under contract with a label and they say get in that room and share ideas and you have to pull out
Yeah.
your notebook and say all sorts of stupid stuff and hope something sticks. And the reality is, every building on that street, I live in Nashville, so every building on Music Row, there's somebody in there doing it. So yeah, there's a little bit of, or probably a lot of it, I guess, of you have innate skill and innate ability. But the reality is, you just keep doing the hard work, and sometimes the planets align. And there's one side of you that could say, "Dude, you had the opportunity, you stepped up and you beat that guy," and the
Correct.
other side is, "Well, I got darn lucky," and blah 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 blah. Uh, I would imagine at schools and in working in correction facilities, you hear people all the time who see themselves on the other side of that equation and can't even kind of find a path to something.
Yeah.
What do you tell them?
Yeah. Well, first, I tell them outright, I'm not here to tell you about how cool and awesome and much I win. I'm here to tell you about losing and how crappy it felt and how without the losses, you don't get any of the goodness at all. You just don't get it. I lost when I was in high school. I lost state championship match 2 years in a row. And for me, it was like that's all I cared about. That was like my life's dream was to win those matches. And I lost them both. And 2-time loser is the joke, and that's what I had going on in my head, et cetera, et cetera. But then, honest to goodness, I don't think I would have pursued fighting if I would have won either one of those matches because there wouldn't have been a thing inside of me that was driving for something. And so it was really through those losses. And I have friends, strength through the struggle, strength through adversity, these ideas that there is post-traumatic growth is a real thing. That's where it's at. That's how it's made. That gives you the strength to keep moving forward. And that's exactly what I tell them. I highlight my lowlights and I do it in a unabashed way, proudly. And then that gives people hope. It's almost like it's whether it's permission, whether it's like pushing a release valve of, oh, whoa, there's this cool, quote, cool, awesome fighter guy. And he's talking about how he cried after losses. Wait a minute, I'm not so different than that guy. Maybe I can do this thing too. So it really is that it's just storytelling, sharing my story. And those stories are about getting your freaking butt kicked and getting back up again.
Yeah, there's so many times like in that situation where you said you came in second 2 times in a row. If you had lived in a different state or a different year or whatever it might be, you could have been on top of the podium 2 times, right? There is a bit of I can't control the circumstances here at the end of the day. I can just control me and the
Yeah.
choices I make.
And I can tell you that me at that time versus me now, I would self-fulfill myself into those losses. Now, if I would re-wrestle those matches or refight or even have a huge speaking gig, which is very also nerve-wracking, I could be talking to myself in a negative way, but I just don't listen. I don't believe it. I don't give credence to it. I don't give any validity to it. I think, okay, stupid Charlie, you can say all you want, but you know you're ready, so go perform. And that's experience. It's just time and experience that is kind of my unfortunate truth of acquiring that kind of mindset is just keep going.
So there aren't necessarily shortcuts, but I bet you there's some things that you've learned that you can
100%.
say like, hey, folks, if you learn to say this to yourself or
Yep.
remind yourself of this or embrace a mantra like this, it could be help. I mean, are there certain things that you kind of, when you're talking to audiences, whether corporate audiences, people in correction facilities, schools, I mean, there's certain things like, let me leave you with a couple things that could really help
Yeah.
you in those moments.
Yeah. And again, they're almost disappointing because they're not fast and easy, but your habits are 100% one of the number one things. Like, what are you doing? How? So, for example, I lose, I get knocked out. I eat a bunch of crap. I do that for 4 months. That's definitely not going to help me rebound, right?
Right.
So I would give myself almost like a mourning period. I would give myself about a week, maybe 10 days of just the picture like curling up in a ball and crying and eating comforting foods and thinking you're a big loser, like you might after a breakup. But then on the 8th day, I would make myself get up and go train. So it was like there was a scheduled morning period, and then there was a get back on the horse mandated. Like I had to self mandate that. No one else is going to do it for me. So your habits are huge. Surroundings, and when I say surroundings, surround yourself with the best. You don't have to move across the country, across the state, but what books are you reading? What podcasts are you listening to? What mantras or sentences or quotes are you keeping on hand? Are you talking about how you're feeling with someone else? For me, that's huge. Whether it's my wife, my best friends, whoever is voicing, and it's embarrassing. Like when you start to voice out loud the things you're saying to yourself, it's embarrassing, and you don't want people to know that you think that stuff, but releasing that is extremely beneficial. Yeah, so the habits, your surroundings, talking about it, not keeping it in, those have all been extremely helpful.
You know, I love as you're sharing those because I'm like, okay, I'm sure that your audiences think this as well. Like, okay, I'm not the only one in the world.
For
You
sure.
know, right? Last year, you and I were talking ahead of time, and people will pick up on this over the course of this podcast and as this book with James Patterson launches. But you know, there was like, I'm going to quit the university, which I've been at 11 years. There's probably 1,000 people in line to take my job if I leave. I'm going to give that
Yeah.
up to go write this book that may or may not go through. There's a lot of like doubt in those moments, but sometimes you just have to shoot your shot and give it and
Yeah.
see what happens. I mean, I can't write a book on disruption and not be willing to be disruptive to myself. And you certainly
Correct.
can't go out and not just disrupt yourself, but also tell students and tell folks that you talk to, hey, you know, you're going to mess up, and let me tell you a couple of mine. I mean, the
Yeah.
ability to kind of share that with people and try it yourself. I mean, it's a lot easier to give advice or counsel or suggestions to people if you're willing to open up, but you're right. It's so tough sometimes. Just go even to your friends, like, here's something that's going on in my mind. And they look at you like, what are you talking about? That's
Yeah.
they're almost like, that's silly talk, man. Charlie, why are you doing that?
Yeah. And then if you fail, those become stories to tell. You know, it's like that's all part of the it's all part of the thing, not a game, but it's all part of the story. The more you try, the more you fail, the more artillery, the more stories you have to prove the points that you're so stinking determined to prove and to show. You know, book sales. I'm a best-selling author. The reality, in my case, a best-selling author is strategic decision making. It is sales. You know, I had to have several hundred sales, but it's not 50,000 sales that, for me anyway. I self-publish, etc. You know, it's strategic, right? But then everything that goes into that is so much. There's so much work that goes into it. And then at the end, it's like, all right, how can we position this as a bestseller? And then it becomes, wait a minute, what is my goal? I just read a book. I wish I could quote it off the top of my head. Oh, it's a new, the brothers, Dan and Chip Heath. It's his newest one of theirs newest one. I forget. But anyway, it was, what's the goal of the goal? Right? What's the goal of the goal? Okay, I want to be a best-selling author. All right, that's the goal. Well, what's the goal of the goal? Why do I want to be a best-selling author? Because I want to impact a lot of people for the better. Okay, well then, if you can strategically, I'm going on a rant here, but if you can strategically become a number one selling author without reaching millions of people, well, crap, I got to reframe my goal to reach millions of people rather than being a best-selling author. So in a roundabout way, what I'm saying is, we set out on a journey to write a book, and then we set out on a journey to become a best-selling author. And then we were a best-selling author. And then we realized, wow, like, I want to reach millions of people, not just be a best-selling author. So then we reframe that and we look at how can we reach more people? And then it just continues the business journey of figuring out how this business of reaching people works. So all of that in a nutshell is part of the story of where I'm at and what I'm doing. And I can't be that person without recording 2,500 podcast episodes and then realizing, boy, there are not a lot of people listening to this podcast. Should I pivot? And then creating books and thinking, man, these books are extremely hard to sell. How can we pivot or change that? But it all comes back to this, just keep going. Keep putting it together. Keep piecing it together. Keep learning from it and just keep moving forward. Don't quit.
Yeah. No, I hear it. It is, and it's interesting how you gain that clarity and you learn those lessons through those experiences. So if folks if they listen to, they go, okay, this Charlie the Spaniard guy, he's onto something. Like, I'd love my company to learn some stuff from him, or I'd love him to come talk to the students in our school or whatever it might be. You know, how do they learn more about you? How do they stay connected to you?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that. My website is charliespaniard.com. Charlie is my name. Spaniard is my nickname. charliespaniard.com. It has my podcast links. I still have them all live and active on all the podcast directories. I just don't actively produce anymore. It has my social media, it has the booking information. It's all there. And then, like I said, there's 2,500 podcast episodes if you want to like really get to know me. I cringe. I don't know if you ever listen to your old podcast, but I cringe when I listen. I'd like briefly accidentally hit play a couple times. But at the time they were the best I could do.
No, that's exactly. No, I'll listen to this one 2 months from now, but I'll be like, man, Charlie sounded great. I sounded like a fool. But anyway, but that's part of the journey, right? It's just part of the journey.
The opposite.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, hey, I really appreciate that you've been on this journey with me. I've loved having you connected. I've actually, we floated a couple people back and forth and tried to help each other out. And that's what this life's really all about is, how can we help each other out dealing, in my case, with disruptive times, in your case, like really focusing in on the habits that matter and consistently sticking to them, and how over the course of time through ups and downs and successes and values, you learn a lot. But I think we're all trying to help people do the same thing. And the cool thing is along the way, we get to help ourselves. I was actually I was in a meeting the other day. I'm writing on another project, and I was talking to the co-author on that project. And I said, can you believe somebody's paying us to do this? Yeah. Right. And we were just kind of playing with an idea, which I enjoy doing. And when you start to figure that out, it's like, yeah, ultimately I'm getting paid to help people live better lives. Yeah. Which is a really, really cool thing. Well, hey man, I appreciate you. And I'm glad you're in my network. I'm glad I can call you friend. I'm glad I'm not getting punched or kicked or thrown by you, because I would break in every one of those instances, but I just like to have it on my side. But hey folks, if you enjoyed this conversation, please check out his link. I'll put the notes how you can find the website, but it is charliespaniard.com. He goes by Charlie the Spaniard Brenneman. And trust me, he's great to have in your corner. And for those of you who've never listened to the podcast, check out past episodes. We just started releasing this in June of 2025, leading up to the launch of the book, Disrupt Everything. But we're going to keep this thing going because I think you'll learn lessons from people like Charlie that'll help you in your life. I know they're helping me. I'm Dr. Patrick Ledden. That's all I have for today. Go make it a great day.